Thank you for joining Bruce County Public Library for this live presentation. My name is Nancy Kuhl, and I'm the Program Coordinator for Bruce County Public Library. And today I'm very pleased to host Jennifer Stevens. Jennifer is the General Manager and Secretary Treasurer from the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. Unique to Ontario, conservation authorities are local watershed management agencies that deliver services and programs to protect and manage impacts on water and other natural resources in partnership with all levels of government, landowners, and many other organizations. So today, Jennifer will outline the work that is done by SVCA, and they do a lot of work here in our communities. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. So following our introductions, Jennifer will begin her presentation, and she has a PowerPoint to share with you today. And while listening and watching, we encourage you to submit any questions or comments to our web form on the Bruce County Public Library website under our Events tab. And you should be able to see that link on our screen here, or you can add your comments in during the presentation, and we'll address those towards the end. And you also may wish to take this opportunity to grab a pen and paper and jot down any programs or resources or items of interest to you. And if you don't get a chance to watch live today, this presentation will be recorded and posted here on the library's YouTube channel in our special guests playlist. You will find the recording there, so you can watch it later, share it with your friends and your family. And if you haven't already, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So here we go. Jennifer has recently become the General Manager at SVCA, and moving into her position at SVCA, she has now worked with 10 different conservation authorities, and she is passionate about the work done by conservation authorities to promote an integrated watershed management approach to balancing human, environmental, and economic needs. And when she says she is passionate, she was just sharing about some of the projects and things that she has worked on, and she is indeed very passionate and knowledgeable about her job and what she does. So welcome, Jennifer. We're happy to have you here with us today. And we're going to look forward to learning more about your work and your programs. And I know you have a lot to share with us. So I'm going to stop talking now, and we'll turn it over to you, and so you can get started.
Thank you, Nancy. And good afternoon to everybody. I will be talking today about seeing the big picture at Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. Before I begin getting into the programs and services we offer specifically at Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, I thought I'd provide you with some background. We'll start with the story of conservation, which begins in the rural watersheds of Ontario, where deforestation for agricultural lands was ultimately for the purposes of agricultural land uses, led to erosion, which then led to runoff and flooding, as well as drought. Conservation organizations then came together to address the environmental conditions at the time, and the result was the Conservation Authorities Act, which was passed in 1946. The most famous hurricane in Canadian history, Hurricane Hazel, then struck southern Ontario in October 1954. 11 inches of rain fell within 48 hours. This hurricane provided the impetus to amend the Conservation Authorities Act to include powers to control works to prevent floods and pollution. So as Nancy indicated in the introduction, conservation authorities are local watershed management agencies. There are 36 in the province of Ontario, 31 are in southern Ontario, and 5 within northern Ontario. 90% of Ontario's population actually lives in watersheds managed by conservation authorities. So just a little bit of background about Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. The actual jurisdiction is 4,632 square kilometers. We have 15 local municipalities as well as parts of 5 counties. The river itself is 160 kilometers long, beginning at its source in the Osprey wetlands near Maxwell, to the mouth near Southampton. And in terms of elevation from its mouth or source to the mouth, the total fall is 300 meters. And the average freshet in the spring, so once we have the actual spring melt of snow and ice, once the warmer weather starts to set in, is actually 560,000 liters per second. So that's a whole lot of water. The Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority actually is composed of 10 major subwatersheds. These are all colored in different colors here in this map. They include the Pine Watershed, the Penetangator, other lake fringe tributary watersheds, the Lower Main Saugeen, the Rocky Saugeen, the Upper Main Saugeen, the Beatty Saugeen, the Teeswater River, and last but not least, the South Saugeen River. So in terms of moving forward with a discussion about a watershed-based agency, I think it's important just to touch on what a watershed actually is. It's an area of land that catches rain and snow and actually has seeps and groundwater into a marsh, a stream, a river, a lake, or other aquifers. Watersheds come in all shapes and sizes and can vary from millions of acres, like the land that drains into the Great Lakes, or a few acres that just drain into a pond. Conservation authorities rely on an integrated watershed management approach to protect water resources and address escalating environmental challenges from the impacts of climate change and urbanization. The 5 principles that we try to adhere to are watershed-based decisions informed by science, managing natural resources together with human activities that are taking place on the ground. Integrated watershed management also considers the interests and needs of not just the environment, but also the economy and society, because they are connected and impact each other in good and as well as bad ways. In addition, the integrated watershed management approach relies on an adaptive management approach, which establishes a plan to monitor and report on the state of the environment, then reevaluate and update that plan as necessary. And also, more importantly, integrated watershed management requires a need for collaborative governance at many levels of government for shared decision-making and priority setting. With nature being vital to our health, economy, and security, and with global warming a reality, the mandate of conservation authorities remains as relevant now as when they were initially formulated. Broadly speaking, the mandate of conservation authorities is shown on this slide, but breaking this down into components, conservation authorities safeguard Ontario's rivers, lakes, and streams. They protect, manage, and restore Ontario's woodlands, wetlands, and natural habitats. They develop and maintain programs that will protect life and property from natural hazards such as flooding and erosions. Lastly, they provide opportunities for the public to enjoy, learn from, and respect Ontario's natural environment. Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority has multiple conservation areas across our watershed where the public can camp, hike, canoe, and ski. In addition, the authority owns thousands of acres of significant forests, wetlands, reforest areas, and properties which protect valuable headwater areas. And prevention program and services. Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority's overall flood management program encompasses both non-structural approaches designed to keep people away from water and structural approaches which were designed to keep water away from people. The flood forecasting and warning program allows Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority to warn residents in floodplains to reduce risk to life and property. So what is its purpose? To relay routine information concerning watershed river conditions to selected agencies and municipal officials, as well as to provide rapid advance warning and technical support to concerned officials and to citizens whose lives and property may be endangered by floodwaters. Internally, we fall back on two main documents to guide our efforts. The first is our flood contingency plan, which is updated on an annual basis, as well as the Ontario Flood Forecasting and Warning Manual by an interagency group of specialists representing the provincial and federal government, as well as conservation authorities. The backbone of the flood warning program at SVCA are the 21 stream gauges. These structures are comprised of a stilling well, which is embedded in the riverbank. Then it's connected to an intake pipe. A sensor within the well records hourly changes in water level. And this data is then accessible remotely to our office via telemetry software, which pulls each of the gauges automatically and populates our internal database, ensuring that we have data readily available to respond in a timely manner. Stream gauges also have a critical role for maintaining a long-term record of flow. For example, in this particular slide, you could actually see how flow varies on the Beatty River. And this information continues to be maintained and verified by staff at Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. Another critical piece of infrastructure related to flood forecasting is our network of rain gauges. Similarly, they are pulled hourly, and provide forecasters with a snapshot of rain accumulations, which in turn are used to estimate runoff volumes. We are also able to predict runoff volumes by conducting snow surveys. Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority operates 14 snow courses throughout our jurisdiction on a bi-weekly basis between November and May. At each of these sites, we take 10 depth measurements at set locations, which are then weighed in order to determine the snow water equivalent, relative water content, which is presented in millimeters of runoff potential. All conservation authorities across the province use a standardized color coding system. And this messaging system is to relay information about floods. So starting in yellow, the watershed condition statement is issued when general watershed conditions suggest high runoff potential that could lead to flooding, and to remind the public that rivers, streams, and ponds may be unsafe for recreational or other activities. In addition, high flows, unsafe banks, melting ice, or other factors that may result in watercourses being too dangerous for recreational users or the general public. In orange, a flood watch message is issued when the potential for generalized flooding exists throughout the watershed or identified in specific municipalities. And the most extensive and severe of these warning messages is the actual flood warning, which are issued when flooding is occurring or is about to occur. It typically applies to a specific area of the watershed. A new standardized message for shorelines was developed among conservation authorities in 2020 with jurisdiction along the Great Lakes. Generally, this is as a result of the high lake levels, which we have been seeing on the Great Lakes in 2020, and the fact that this can continue to be a flood hazard. The definition for a shoreline condition statement is an early notice of the potential for flooding conditions on the Great Lakes based on weather and lake conditions. We're continuing to work out criteria that would warrant the issuance of such a message. A total of 19 flood and erosion control structures have been constructed across the watershed. This infrastructure has cost $13.5 million to put in place, and Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority owns and operates 3 of these dams. The annual cost of maintenance of these structures is $160,000. However, this infrastructure protects 1,120 buildings, homes, and businesses, and over 4,500 people. With that, I'll be moving into environmental planning and regulations. In terms of our environmental planning and regulations department, there are three different aspects of the work that is done. Plan input and review, which is the review of Planning Act applications, as well as development proposals and inquiries. The second component is implementation and enforcement of Regulation 169.06, which speaks to permits, the enforcement of the regulation, and development proposals and inquiries. Lastly, Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority staff provide additional information and technical expertise with respect to municipal drains, as well as environmental assessments, as well as various other provincial approvals, such as an environmental compliance approval. So before we get into a more extensive discussion about environmental planning and regulations, I thought it best that we touch on natural hazards and what they actually are. Flooding hazards, erosion hazards, and dynamic beach hazards adjacent to the shorelines of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River system and large inland lakes is one natural hazard, or one group of natural hazards. The second group is flooding and erosion hazards adjacent to river, stream, and small inland lake systems. And lastly, the third group are hazardous sites, which are those that are located on Leda clays, unstable bedrock, and organic solids. Regulation 169.06 is the general regulation under the Conservation Authorities Act that is specific to Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. Its intent is to protect against loss of life, property damage, and social disruption from flood and erosion processes. In addition to that, its role is also to ensure the conservation of local ecosystems. Areas regulated under Regulation 169.06 include hazardous lands, river or stream valleys, shorelines along Lake Huron, water courses, which include the rivers, streams, and tributaries of the Saugeen River, wetlands, as well as areas of interference next to wetlands, which ultimately translate to areas which could actually impact a wetland. So our role in terms of regulating activities within these areas is such that any new buildings and or structure or changes to intensification of any of these features will require a permit from Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. Any kind of cleaning out of a watercourse, straightening it, making a dock accessible on the watercourse, or any crossings or enclosures also would require a permit, as well as laneway, drainage, and roadway works. In addition, any kind of site alteration, such as filling or grading a particular site, could also require Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority permitting. And last but not least, any kind of infrastructure works which would impact any of these watercourses or wetlands would require a permit. This particular diagram or figure actually depicts areas where we have concerns with respect to environmental planning and regulations. So for example, in yellow, you can see that this is the approximate regulated area. So therefore, with the river now flowing through this yellow jurisdiction, we're most concerned about activities that would take place within this yellow area, and the permits that would be required to be issued for these developments would in fact need to ensure having conditions that would protect the proposed development, to ensure that there is not loss of property, but also loss of life. In the orange, these are screening areas that we would still be interested in seeing whether or not the exact specifications, if you will, of the development proposal, so we can confirm that there will be no impact on the development, as well as any detrimental impact on the environment. All conservation authorities have been delegated responsibility under the provincial one window planning system for natural hazard management. The one window planning system means that all organizations that work collaboratively to address a particular development are responding through the provincial one window approach to ensure that all aspects of that planning development are being responded to in a timely fashion. A memorandum of understanding has actually been developed and was developed quite a ways ago, and it outlines the delegated responsibilities from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to represent the provincial interests regarding natural hazards in the provincial policy statement. These delegated responsibilities require the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority to review and provide comments on municipal planning documents, such as official plans and comprehensive zoning bylaws, as well as other development application. Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority's purpose is to ensure municipal planning documents and development applications are consistent with the natural hazard policies of the provincial policy statement. With that, I'll now move into our water quality monitoring program. There are three general objectives to our water quality monitoring program. We want to establish baseline water quality data so we understand what it's like at that particular location within a particular river system. We want to also look at the trends which exist and whether or not water quality is improving or deteriorating, which leads to us being able to assess the effectiveness of our watershed programs. One of the things that is unique about water quality and aspects is such that it integrates three main components of science: chemistry, biology, and hydrology. There are three main focus areas to our water quality monitoring program. We have surface water monitoring, biomonitoring, and groundwater monitoring. And I'll be speaking about each of these in a little bit detail. Our surface water monitoring takes surface water samples at 29 different stations across our watershed. You can actually see here an example of a bottle that is collected at each station, or one of a number of water bottles collected at each station. And this information, or these bottles, are either sent to the Ministry of the Environment and Conservation and Parks due to our relationship with the province through the Provincial Water Quality Monitoring Network, or alternatively to a private lab, because Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority also collects additional samples from additional sites to further characterize our watershed. You can see here generally the water is taken from the middle of the river, and we do use what is called a water quality probe to collect additional information about the sample being collected, such as temperature, dissolved oxygen, conductivity, and pH. Biomonitoring is really sampling the sediments for insect larvae. Various insect species have very distinct and different pollution tolerances, and depending on the organisms that are found at a particular site, that will help characterize the particular site and the environment as a whole in the vicinity of that site as having good water quality or poor water quality. These samples are collected in the spring. Lastly, we have groundwater monitoring. We have 23 aquifers at 14 sites within the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority jurisdiction that participate in the Provincial Groundwater Monitoring Network, which was set up in the early 2000s, 2002, 3, and 4. And once again, it is a collaboration with the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation, and Parks. The Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority staff collect water level and maintenance, do maintenance checks on a quarterly basis, as well as we collect the water quality information and do any kind of work to ensure that the information collected at the well is accurate. All of this information then is brought together and put into what is called a watershed report card. The standards for a watershed report card are actually consistent across the province of Ontario. There are a number of aspects to the watershed report card. This is just one part, which speaks to water quality. And you can see that at this particular river, the South Saugeen River, the reading or the grade assigned is a B+. And that is based on looking at the values and grading from 2002 on a 5-year basis all the way to 2016. We will be again updating our watershed report cards for all of our sub-watershed on a 5-year basis. So we are expecting to do that in 2021. Next, I want to talk about the Drinking Water Source Protection Program. As a result of the Walkerton tragedy in 2000, the multi-barrier approach was adopted by the province of Ontario to ensure that our drinking water is as safe as possible when it comes from a tap. So the first aspect of that multi-barrier approach is actually making sure that our water itself is as pristine and clean as possible. That is but one step in the multi-barrier approach, which then moves on through the water treatment system, inspection, and testing, all components of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So between the Clean Water Act, which is the source water protection component of the multi-barrier approach, and the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is components 2, 3, and 4, and 5, which outline the ways in which the certification of operators is conducted, as well as the frequency of testing at each facility and guidelines with respect to where water quality parameters should fall within raw as well as treated water, all come together to ensure that the water that you are drinking out of your tap is the best it can be. In Ontario, there are 38 source protection areas that were created under the Clean Water Act. We fall within the Saugeen Valley, Grey Sauble, and Northern Bruce Peninsula Source Protection Region, which is, of course, to the west of this map. But you will notice that 19 different source protection regions have come together where multiple source protection areas, where it made sense for multiple source protection areas to work collaboratively. Under the Clean Water Act, there are 4 different vulnerable areas that have been delineated. Here are the 2 most significant of those areas. On the left is a wellhead protection area, and on the right is a series of intake protection zones. The other 2 vulnerable areas delineated include significant groundwater recharge areas and highly vulnerable aquifers. Within a wellhead protection area on the left or an intake protection zone on the right, you can have what are called significant drinking water threats, which I'll be talking about shortly. However, within these areas, we are, by delineating an actual intake protection zone and a wellhead protection area, we are able to determine the length of time it would take for a contaminant to make its way from one end of the wellhead protection area to the source. So for example, from the end of this yellow jurisdiction to the round circle, which is within 100-meter circumference of the municipal well. Similarly, in the dark blue on the right, this is the radius around a municipal surface intake of 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer. Under the Clean Water Act, there are 22 prescribed drinking water threats, and these are outlined specifically for the purpose of using a semi-quantitative tracking system or risk formula to determine how the threat is significant based on its proximity to the municipal well or the intake. Here are just some examples of these prescribed drinking water threats: a septic system, a fuel storage, chemical storage, the application, storage, and handling of pesticides, non-agricultural source material such as biosolids, or the application of fertilizer, as well as livestock confinement areas and outdoor livestock grazing areas or outdoor confinement areas, all fall within the list of prescribed drinking water threats. So once we had the assessment of where significant threats were identified, it was incumbent on each Source Protection Committee, 19 in the province, to work together within their respective jurisdictions to prepare a locally developed source protection plan. And that source protection plan had the ability to include policies that ranged from prohibiting a particular activity to managing a particular activity through a risk management plan, to using prescribed instruments such as an environmental compliance approval, which already existed for a particular site, or a permit to take water, or a nutrient management strategy, to land use planning approaches, as well as incentive programs and education and outreach approaches to, in fact, address the significant drinking water threat so that it ceased to be significant. At this point in time, we are working collaboratively with the Grey Sauble Source Protection Area, as well as the Northern Bruce Peninsula Source Protection Area, to implement the source protection plan that has been prepared among the three source protection area jurisdictions, but by the Source Protection Committee in collaboration with the municipalities, the province, and others to implement the plan. And at this stage, the majority, over 90% of the policies have been implemented and are in the process of continuing to be implemented. I'll next speak about the forestry program. In terms of our forestry program, we have a tree planting program, as well as a managed forest tax incentive program, where applications for authority properties and private landowners can be applied for through this program, as well as the tree marking and tendering program, and last but not least, the maintenance and improvement projects related to authority forested properties, and we have about 8,000 hectares. So our tree planting program is essentially for landowners who are interested in planting trees on marginal agricultural or fragile land, creating or improvement wildlife habitat, establishing windbreaks, or planting along stream banks. Landowners also have the option to participate in a total service package, which includes a site inspection, project planning, the ordering and planting of the trees, as well as vegetation control. The Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program is an initiative with the province of Ontario. Landowners who get their property classified as a managed forest pay 25% of the municipal tax rate set for residential properties. Landowners are required to prepare and follow a 10-year managed forest plan that details how you will manage your forest property responsibly. Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority forestry staff work collaboratively with landowners to develop these plans, as well as assist in their implementation. Approximately 90% of Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority's forested land is productive timberland, with the remainder being comprised of lowland, poor quality, or inaccessible timber. The forest management plan seen here on your left is current to 2025. So we are in the process of starting to update this document. The document addresses forest health, forest management practices, sustainability, species and ecological diversity, economics, wetland and water system health, amongst other things. I'll next move on to our stewardship programs and services. The first is community support and partnership. We strive to connect and support community groups across the watershed, as well as provide technical assistance on the design of projects, as well as their implementation to both landowners and municipal staff. We also provide project funding support. We have staff that put a concerted effort into actively seeking out grant funding for project implementation for within the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority watershed, not only to be conducted by staff, but also to be conducted by groups such as the Lake Huron Center for Coastal Conservation, the Pine River Improvement Network, and other community groups. It is intended that this support will allow municipalities, landowners, and community groups in applications for funding to support their initiatives. Recently, Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority was able to announce, with the financial support from the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, that we are able to have a water well improvement program with the express purpose in decreasing the costs for landowners to complete well decommissioning or well upgrading on their property with respect to either an abandoned well or a well that does require upgrading. By doing so, we ensure that our groundwater aquifers are being protected for the purpose of supplying our wetlands, but also supplying municipal aquifers that are the sources of drinking water. In addition to the other stewardship activities I've outlined, we also maintain and improve outreach to the agricultural community. We have a coffee, crops, and donuts program that has been done and has been very successful in the past. Have had to adapt for COVID-19, but are looking to reinvent the program to comply with what we are able to deliver while ensuring the consistency with the guidelines as outlined by the province and the local health unit. We hope to continue to build on our funding support for our cover crop incentive program through our budget for 2021, as well as we want to continue to improve the understanding of the needs of the agricultural community. As outlined on the previous slide, we also want to seek out grant funding opportunities for project implementation, in particular beneficial management practices such as alternative livestock watering or livestock fencing, such that livestock are not accessing any of our watercourses. The last program and service I'll speak to now is conservation education. Our conservation education programming is extensive. We offer several independent programs that are conducted with stakeholders across our jurisdiction, as well as we do have a number of our own programs and services related to conservation education, such as the Fall Encounters program, which is just recently wrapping up. So here you see on the left is our Wonders of Wetlands program, where we have school-aged children coming out and understanding the role of wetlands and being able to be in the field as opposed to having a classroom setting only to understand the interdisciplinary nature of wetlands. In the middle here, you'll see that the young lady is actually using some water quality testing or tests to actually determine water quality, and is understanding the nature of what we do at a far smaller scale. And on the right, we have the Yellowfish Road, where students are able to paint fish on the road, which is a reminder that everything that is put on an impervious surface such as pavement eventually makes its way into our storm sewers. We also conduct on an annual basis the Water Festival and the Forest Festival, where our staff at Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority come together with the school boards and other like stewardship groups to communicate the importance of water as well as our forests to the students and allow them to practice what they learn in the field. Recently, there have been changes to the Conservation Authorities Act, and these recent changes will have an impact on what we do moving forward. For example, now a minister's zoning order could force a conservation authority to issue a permit, even if it goes against their provincially delegated responsibility to protect people, infrastructure, and the environment. In addition, the amended Conservation Authorities Act includes new powers for the minister to bypass conservation authorities and issue permits. We are also curtailed, or our ability to appeal to the local planning appeal tribunal is also curtailed. As well, we are expecting that amendments as a result of the Conservation Authority Act changes are going to create additional delays to the approvals process, as well as increased costs for municipalities, applicants, and conservation authorities. The enabling regulations, which generally correspond with an amendment to a piece of legislation, have still to be released. And these will outline how these changes to the Conservation Authorities Act will be implemented. We are expecting these regulations to be released in 2 separate cohorts in 2021. So with these recent changes to the Conservation Authorities Act, and also looking ahead to the importance of engaging the watershed residents, our stakeholders, including non-for-profit groups and environmental organizations and the province in the work that we do, we are partaking and embarking on a strategic plan development process, which will be initiated in January and will be wrapped up in June of next year. We will be reaching out to watershed residents through a variety of approaches, taking into account the current COVID-19 situation and ensuring that everybody's health and safety is foremost at the is being considered. But we will be looking for input into how you see the Conservation Authority continuing to deliver the services it delivers in a cost-effective, thorough, and efficient manner. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I'll leave you with the hashtag Conservation Matters. And I encourage you to visit our website to take a look at our programs and services in more detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. That was really super thorough, and wow, you highlighted a lot of the programs that the Conservation Authority looks after and monitors. So thank you very, very much for that. We did have a couple of questions come in through our submission form, so I can go over with those with you now. Okay, so the first one here is from Ken. Thank you, Ken, for sending in a question today. So he was just saying, he sent this off right at the start of presentation. So he apologized for if you were going to cover this in the presentation. So he did say, without asking you to dive into the politics, can you assess some of the biggest effects that the provincial funding cuts will have on the work of conservation authorities, which you kind of went over in the final slide there. Did you want to add anything to that, Jennifer?
I think at this particular time, really, we know that there are going to be significant impacts because now the minister will have greater power to release, to essentially issue a permit, which we might, as a conservation authority, not agree with. In addition to that, if a landowner is not particularly pleased with either the permit being issued or not being issued, instead of just appealing to the board of directors now of the respective conservation authority, in fact now there is the ability for the proponent to appeal to the minister. And with that comes many challenges. First of all, the fact that this decision, or the decision with respect to the permit, was made locally, and all of a sudden we're asking a higher power that perhaps doesn't have the most current, up-to-date watershed information to make a decision. Secondly, when we look at the hierarchy of our government departments and services, they are plentiful and they are convoluted. And with that, we anticipate delays, which will also result in delays with respect to a decision at the Conservation Authority, because we will have to become involved in that appeal process if requested. And in doing so, that's going to take us away from doing other permits and moving other priorities forward. So there is quite a bit of nuance, if you will, that will need to be ironed out. And really, we're limited by how we can move forward until such time as the regulations come out that will give us sort of the meat to the framework that has been proposed under the amended Conservation Authorities Act.
Mm-hmm. It's a big change from the way that you've worked before.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I understand that. Thank you for addressing that. I'm sure that's kind of on a lot of people's minds these days too, since that is a very recent change. I have another question here. So you talked about you're going to be going through your strategic plan. And I just wondered, maybe in respects to that or in any other way, is there a way for members of the public to become involved with the SVCA or to volunteer in any way?
Oh, we would love to have volunteers. Absolutely love to have volunteers. We are looking at since I arrived in June with the Conservation Authority, we have big plans in development. Of course, the biggest is the creation of the strategic plan, which will help direct our work. And it also will hold us accountable for the programs and services we offer and be able to report back to our municipalities as well as our watershed residents. We are looking at also enhancing our volunteer our volunteer program, so that there are opportunities for those who are interested in working with us to continue to do so or to sign up to do so. We currently have arrangements with the high schools to get involved through their co-op programs, and there have been some residents who have reached out locally with an interest in getting involved, and I would love to hear from you. Absolutely love it.
And we'll share your contact information in the description below after the presentation is recorded and saved to our YouTube channel. So if people wanted to get in touch with you there, they could just refer back to here, or they can always just reach out to SVCA for if you're interested in volunteering with any of their programs. I must say I did get to witness a tree planting project about 12, 14 years ago. and it was over. Well, the acreage was 200 acres. The whole thing wasn't wasn't involved in tree planting, but like a lot of different pine and cedar and everything going in, and it was just amazing. Like your team came in and they planted the whole thing in like 2 days, and it was phenomenal to watch. And now you walk through there, and it's this wonderful habitat, and you can see animal trails and deer trails and everything through the bush, and it's amazing. So I really appreciate that particular program of SVCA for sure. So I have one more question here. Somebody had submitted a question through our web forum. What sort of educational background do you have, and what would you recommend for somebody wanting to work in conservation?
Oh my goodness. So I actually have 2 undergraduate degrees, one in botany and as well in zoology, and they focus on the aquatic environment specifically. Just because when you look at our natural environment, it's so complex. So I delved my feet, or dangled my feet in the water just a bit, and I was hooked. So after that, I actually did my master's degree, and I studied 45 lakes in the Muskoka Haliburton region, and the impact of development on those lakes over the last 100 years. And that particular graduate work was in the Department of Biology. However, if it was at other educational or other universities, it might have been considered geology, because I specifically focused on paleolimnology, so I could take a look at not just the water chemistry, but also looking at the sediments and the geology of lakes. Now, in terms of my educational background, it's really just a drop in the bucket, because I've learned so much over the years. I started working with South Nation Conservation over 17 years ago, and after, I think it was my first month there, I was convinced that I wanted to stay in the world of conservation authorities. And I didn't learn, it didn't take long afterwards to know that my career aspiration was to be a general manager. And here I am 17 years later.
Wonderful.
I know, it's really a dream come true. I mean, not to sound trite, but it is. I'm thrilled to be here. And I've worked on the drinking water source protection program for about 9 of those years, as well as so within 2 different source protection regions in the province. I worked with the Trent Conservation Coalition, which is just east of Toronto, and then most recently, I worked with the CTC, which is Credit Valley Conservation Toronto and Region, and Central Lake Ontario source protection areas. And it was really, they were so different, because the Trent Conservation Coalition is 5 conservation authorities or source protection authorities, and they go from where they're mostly rural to the other extreme, where you have the City of Toronto, the Region of Peel, York Region.
Yeah.
But I'm an Ottawa Valley girl. I grew up on a farm, and coming here has really cemented that this is the environment I love. But in between my positions, working on the source protection program, I have been able to get more experience internationally, working actually with the Canadian Steel Producers Association to give me that sort of industrial perspective. And in that position, I did a lot of climate change work and was involved in air and climate change policy, as well as I worked for the government of Manitoba, where I was responsible for their water quality monitoring programs. And so going back to the original question, I think that somebody who has is passionate about the environment most certainly should should stick with that passion, because I would have to say that every one of the staff that I have at Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority falls within that description. And because of that, we are able to do such great work. If the person who's written the question is in high school, I would encourage you to look at opportunities for volunteering. If you're in university already, I would take a look at, once again, getting that real world experience before you graduate with your degree, because things have changed over the last 5 to 10 years, and really there seems to be much more interest in the environmental field, which I think is phenomenal. But you also need something that will set you apart, and
Right.
that real world experience will do that.
Yeah.
We're interested in having capable and responsible people with a tangible interest in protecting the environment to work with us. So if there is an interest in looking at getting some experience, I'd encourage you to contact me. In terms of if whoever asked the question hasn't looked into universities yet, I really encourage you to look broadly, because each university has it, and college have they distinguish themselves. And there's some really great collaborative arrangements now. Like, for example, Georgian College and Lakehead are working together, so you can get a diploma, which could lead to a degree. In Eastern Ontario, similar arrangements have been made. And then, of course, Waterloo works with Conestoga College. So the actual scientific or technical background to support the hands-on learning is really helpful. And I would encourage a collaborative program, or at least a university program that is very focused on hands-on experience.
Yeah, and you had mentioned co-op earlier, and that you have co-op students occasionally as well. So looking for those co-op opportunities is key too, I think, if you have an interest in that field, and it's a good way to learn what you like and what you don't like.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm just going to do one more quick check to our form here, and I think we're good. Okay. Jennifer, did you have anything else that you wanted to add today before we start signing off here?
Well, I just wanted to add that I'm so pleased that first of all, with the opportunity to speak in this forum, really, I am making every effort to get out to the public, to make people aware, first of all, of the work that we do, but also to bring to everybody's attention the extent to which we benefit from feedback from the public, to be able to improve our programs and services, and the strategic planning process will be exactly that. So we do encourage you to stay, if you're on social media, follow our Facebook or our Twitter, and stay on top of what we do and how we do it. We have embarked on a new communications campaign through our social media, where we actually are posting on a daily basis about what we do and how we do it, to bring more attention to our programs and services, and also take a more educational perspective to the work we do. So check it out.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, and I just wanted to mention too that the library is a source of information about conservation in our environment, so it's a good place to maybe start your search. We have lots of materials, and our staff are always happy to help you find something that you're interested in. Yeah, so thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your information with us today. Hopefully one day we can actually, maybe do something in person.
I would like that very much. I am hoping that eventually we'll be able to have some programs or evenings where we're able to showcase on the ground what we do, and get the public involved in
Absolutely.
water quality sampling, trail walks. And there was a time that that some of these things were done. However, things have changed, and part of the strategic planning process will be the public's opportunity to say what they hope will return to SVCA.
Yeah, perfect. And that's a great way to get involved with SVCA too, is just to get involved with that strategic plan development. Fantastic.
Yes.
So for any more information, just please feel free to contact Jennifer at SVCA. And like I said before, we'll post her contact information here. And I just also wanted to add a couple of thank yous today to our digital services coordinator for getting all our technical stuff set up for today, and everything went off really, really well. Thank you for that. And also thank you to our communications coordinator for setting up our YouTube live stream for us on his end, and for promoting the event online too. Everyone remember to subscribe to Bruce County Public Library on YouTube, where you can find more live and recorded presentations, special guests. We have lots of things for kids and activities you can do at home. And this is our last presentation for 2020. So hopefully you'll join us in the new year, and we'll be having conversations with the Alzheimer's Society and Stewardship Grey Bruce, and we have some other special guests lined up as well. So thanks again, Jennifer, and thank you for tuning in today. And everyone, have a great day. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.